The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned spaceport on Velthara Prime, its golden light revealing the rust and decay that had claimed what was once the jewel of the Outer Rim territories. Captain Sarah Chen stepped off the transport shuttle, her boots crunching on the crystalline sand that had begun to reclaim the landing platforms. Behind her, a small team of human scientists and engineers followed, their eyes wide with wonder at the alien architecture that surrounded them. The Veltharians had built their cities like living organisms, with flowing curves and organic shapes that seemed to breathe with the wind. Tall spires twisted skyward like frozen vines, their surfaces covered in bioluminescent patterns that still flickered weakly after decades of abandonment. It was beautiful beyond description, yet haunting in its emptiness. Dr. Marcus Webb, the mission's chief xenobiologist, adjusted his scanner and frowned at the readings. "The atmospheric composition is perfect for human life," he said, his voice filled with confusion. "Temperature, humidity, oxygen levels, everything is within optimal parameters. Why would anyone abandon this place?" Sarah had been asking herself the same question since the Galactic Council had offered humanity the rights to colonize Velthara Prime. The planet had been evacuated 30 years ago, when the last of the Veltharian population had fled to refugee camps scattered across the galaxy. Every major civilization had turned their backs on the gentle, crystal-skinned people, claiming their world was cursed or contaminated. The humans were the only species desperate enough to take the risk. As the team made their way through the empty streets of what had once been the planetary capital, they encountered their first signs of the former inhabitants. Delicate sculptures lined the pathways, carved from a translucent material that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. Gardens overgrown with strange, luminescent plants stretched between buildings, their alien flowers still blooming despite years of neglect. "Look at this," called Dr. Alina Vasquez, the team's cultural specialist, as she knelt beside a fountain that had long since run dry. The basin was filled with thousands of small, perfectly spherical stones, each one a different color. "These aren't decorative. They're memory stones, a form of data storage unique to Veltharian culture." She picked up one of the stones, a deep blue orb that seemed to glow from within. As her fingers made contact with its surface, holographic images began to dance in the air above it. The team gathered around as scenes of Veltharian life played out before them, families gathering for communal meals, children playing games that involved manipulating light itself, artists creating sculptures that defied physics. The Veltharians were not what the humans had expected. Unlike most spacefaring species, they were remarkably fragile in appearance. Their bodies were tall and willowy, with skin that resembled living crystal, constantly shifting between transparency and opacity. They moved with a grace that seemed almost liquid, and their large, multifaceted eyes held an intelligence that was immediately apparent even through the holographic recordings. But there was something else in those recordings, an underlying sadness, a sense of impending loss that seemed to permeate every scene. "They knew," Sarah whispered, as she watched a group of Veltharian elders standing in what appeared to be a council chamber. "They knew they were going to have to leave." Dr. Webb had wandered ahead while the others examined the memory stones, his scanner continuing to detect anomalous readings from deeper within the city. He called out to the team, his voice echoing strangely off the organic walls. "You need to see this. I'm reading massive energy signatures coming from the central district." The team followed him through winding streets that seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythm. As they walked, Sarah noticed that the bioluminescent patterns on the buildings were growing brighter, as if responding to their presence. It was as if the city itself was awakening after decades of slumber. They emerged into a vast circular plaza dominated by a structure unlike anything they had seen before. It rose from the ground like a massive tree, its trunk twisted and hollow, with branches that spread out to support a canopy of what looked like crystallized light. At its base, a gentle humming filled the air, a sound so low it was felt more than heard. "It's some kind of biotechnology," Dr. Webb said, his scanner nearly overloading from the energy readings. "The entire structure is alive, but it's not organic as we understand it. It's something between biology and technology, a perfect fusion of the two." As they approached the structure, panels of light began to activate along its surface, creating patterns that seemed to respond to their movements. Dr. Vasquez gasped as she recognized the symbols. "These are Veltharian glyphs, but they're different from what we've seen before. More complex, more evolved." The humming grew louder as they drew closer, and suddenly the air around them shimmered. Holographic figures began to materialize, Veltharians, but these were different from those in the memory stones. These beings seemed more refined somehow, their crystal skin showing deeper, more complex patterns of light. One of them stepped forward, and when it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating through the crystalline structures around them. "We greet you, children of distant stars," the figure said, its words somehow translated directly into the humans' minds. "We are the keepers of the final memory, those who remain to witness the last days of our people and to wait for those who would come after." Sarah stepped forward, fighting the urge to bow before this obviously advanced being. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the human exploration vessel Endeavor. We've come to establish a colony here, but we don't understand why your people left this beautiful world." The keeper's multifaceted eyes seemed to focus on her with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. "Your species is unknown to us, yet your presence here suggests a courage that others have lacked. Tell us, children of flesh and bone, what do you know of the weeping?" The humans exchanged confused glances. Dr. Vasquez spoke up. "We've never heard of anything called the weeping. The Galactic Council only told us that Velthara Prime had been evacuated due to environmental hazards." A sound that might have been laughter came from the keeper. "Environmental hazards. Yes, that is how they would describe it. But the truth is far more complex and far more wonderful than they could comprehend." The keeper gestured, and the air around them filled with new images. The team watched in awe as the history of Velthara Prime unfolded before them. They saw the planet in its youth, teeming with life forms that defied classification. They witnessed the rise of Veltharian civilization, built not on conquest or expansion, but on harmony with their world's unique properties. "Our world is special," the keeper explained as the images continued to flow. "It exists at a convergence point where the barriers between dimensions are thin. For millions of years, our people learned to work with these forces, to channel the energies that flow between realities. We became gardeners of space and time itself." The images showed Veltharians manipulating what appeared to be pure energy, shaping it into tools and artworks and even living spaces. They had achieved a level of technology that transcended the mere mechanical, entering realms that other species could only dream of. "But power such as this comes with responsibility," the keeper continued. "As our abilities grew, so did our awareness of the delicate balance that holds all realities together. We discovered that our very existence was beginning to affect that balance." The tone of the images shifted, showing scenes of cosmic instability. Stars flickering and dying, entire systems being torn apart by dimensional storms. The Veltharians had become too powerful for their own universe to contain. "The weeping began 50 years ago," the keeper said, its voice heavy with ancient sadness. "Our tears of regret began to manifest physically, creating rifts in reality itself. Every emotion we felt, every dream we dreamed began to reshape the fundamental forces of existence around us." Sarah felt her breath catch as she began to understand. "You didn't leave because of environmental hazards. You left because you were becoming too powerful, too connected to the fabric of reality itself." Indeed, and the other species of the galaxy, in their fear and ignorance, chose to see this as a curse rather than what it truly was: evolution beyond their comprehension. They abandoned us in our time of greatest need, leaving us to face our transformation alone. The images shifted again, showing the exodus of the Veltharian people. But these weren't scenes of defeat or desperation. Instead, the humans watched as the crystal-skinned beings willingly walked into portals of light, their forms becoming more translucent with each step, until they seemed to merge with the very energy they had learned to control. "Our people did not die," the keeper said, nodding the humans' expressions of wonder. "They transcended. They became one with the dimensional forces they had spent so long learning to harness. They exist now as pure consciousness, gardeners of reality itself, working to maintain the balance between worlds." Dr. Webb found his voice first. "But why did some of you stay behind? Why create these keepers?" "Because we knew that someday others would come. Others who might possess the wisdom and courage that the galaxy's established civilizations lacked. We waited to see if any species would be willing to accept not just our world, but the responsibility that comes with it." The plaza around them seemed to pulse with new energy as the keeper spoke. "Your species is young, untempered by the prejudices and fears that gripped the older civilizations. You have come here not because you were unafraid, but because you were willing to face fear itself for the chance at something greater. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and terror as she realized the implications of the Keeper's words. You're saying that humanity has inherited more than just a planet. We've inherited a responsibility to maintain some kind of cosmic balance. Not maintain, the Keeper corrected. Learn to understand. The forces that flow through this world are not meant to be controlled or contained. They are meant to be experienced, to be grown into. Your species stands at a crossroads, Captain Chen. You can choose to follow the path of those who came before, to exploit and eventually abandon when things become too difficult to understand. Or you can choose to evolve. The holographic images around them began to fade, but the Keeper's presence seemed to grow stronger. The choice is not just yours to make. It is your entire species that will be tested. For if you choose the path of growth, if you choose to embrace the responsibility we offer, then humanity will become the guardians of far more than just one world. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her scientific mind racing with the implications. What exactly are you asking of us? We ask that you make Velthara Prime your home, truly and completely, not as conquerors or colonists, but as inheritors of our legacy. Learn from what we have left behind. Grow into the power that flows through this world. And when the time comes, and it will come, stand as guardians against those forces that would upset the balance between realities. The weight of the moment settled on the human team like a physical presence. They had come expecting to establish a simple colony on an abandoned world. Instead, they were being offered a role in maintaining the stability of existence itself. Sarah looked at her team, seeing the mixture of fear and excitement in their eyes that she felt in her own heart. This was beyond anything humanity had ever been asked to do. It was also the greatest opportunity their species had ever been offered. How do we know we're ready for this? She asked. How do you know we won't make the same mistakes that drove your people to transcend? The Keeper's form began to shimmer, becoming more translucent. Because you are here. Because when every other species in the galaxy turned away from us in fear, your kind chose to come forward. That alone suggests a capacity for growth that others have lost. The energy in the plaza continued to build, and the humans could feel something awakening in the city around them. Lights that had been dim for decades began to shine brightly once again. The organic architecture seemed to pulse with new life. The city recognizes you, the Keeper said. It has been waiting for inhabitants who could appreciate its true nature. But remember, acceptance of this gift comes with a price. Once you truly become part of this world, there will be no returning to what you were before. Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. She thought of Earth, overcrowded and struggling with its own environmental challenges. She thought of humanity's desperate search for new worlds to call home. And she thought of the incredible opportunity that lay before them, not just for survival, but for growth beyond anything their species had ever imagined. I need to contact my superiors, she said finally. This decision can't be made by one person or even by our small team. The Keeper nodded, its crystalline features showing what might have been approval. Wisdom. But know this, the offer will not remain open indefinitely. Already the energies that flow through this world grow restless. They have been contained too long, waiting for new guardians to help channel them properly. As if to emphasize the point, a tremor ran through the ground beneath their feet. The crystalline structures around the plaza sang with harmonious tones as dimensional forces pressed against the barriers that held them in check. How long do we have? Dr. Webb asked, his scanner detecting energy spikes that defied explanation. Time moves differently here than in normal space, the Keeper replied. But in terms your people would understand, perhaps a few of your months. After that, the accumulated energies will need to find release, with or without proper guidance. The implications were clear. If humanity didn't accept the responsibility being offered, the dimensional forces that the Veltharians had spent millennia learning to channel would be released without proper oversight. The results could be catastrophic on a galactic scale. Sarah looked around at the beautiful, impossible city that surrounded them. She thought of the gentle, evolved beings who had built it, and their willingness to sacrifice their physical existence to maintain cosmic balance. Then she thought of her own species, young, aggressive, often selfish, but also adaptable and capable of incredible growth when faced with challenges. We'll need to study everything, she said. The technology, the dimensional sciences, the cultural knowledge your people left behind. If humanity is going to accept this responsibility, we need to understand exactly what we're committing to. The Keeper's form was becoming increasingly translucent, its time as an intermediary apparently drawing to a close. All that we know has been preserved in the memory cores throughout the city. Your Dr. Vasquez has already discovered how to access them. Learn quickly, for time grows short. As the Keeper began to fade completely, it spoke one final time. Remember, children of distant stars, courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. Your species has shown courage in coming here. Now you must show wisdom in deciding what to do next. With those words, the holographic figure vanished completely, leaving the human team alone in the plaza with only the gentle humming of the great tree-like structure to break the silence. Sarah looked at her companions, seeing her own mixture of awe and terror reflected in their faces. They had come to Velthara Prime expecting to establish a simple colony. Instead, they had been offered the chance to help their species evolve into something unprecedented guardians of interdimensional stability. The question now was whether humanity was ready for such a responsibility, and whether they could grow into it quickly enough to prevent cosmic catastrophe. As they began the journey back through the awakening city to their shuttle, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking through the pages of history being written. Every step they took was leading humanity toward a future that would be utterly unlike anything they had known before. The memory stones continued to glow around them, holding the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had transcended physical existence. Somewhere in those glowing orbs lay the knowledge that could transform humanity from a young, struggling species into the guardians of reality itself. But first, they had to convince Earth that such a transformation was not only possible, but necessary for the survival of everything they held dear. The emergency session of the United Earth Council had been in continuous debate for 3 days. Representatives from every nation sat in the circular chamber beneath Geneva, their faces illuminated by holographic displays showing the data transmitted from Velthara Prime. The air was thick with tension and the weight of the most important decision humanity had ever been asked to make. Director Elena Martinez stood at the central podium, her weathered face showing the strain of the past week. As head of the Colonial Expansion Authority, she had overseen humanity's first steps into the galaxy. Never had she imagined a situation like this. "The transmission from Captain Chen's team is clear," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "Velthara Prime is not just another world to be colonized. It's a testing ground that could determine the future evolution of our entire species." Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. Dr. James Harrison, Earth's leading expert on dimensional physics, had been studying the Veltharian data for 72 hours straight. His conclusions were as fascinating as they were terrifying. "The mathematics check out," he said when called upon to address the council. The Veltharians weren't engaging in primitive mysticism. They had developed a genuine science of dimensional manipulation that makes our most advanced theories look like children's drawings. But the power they were dealing with, it's beyond anything we've ever encountered. Representative Chen Wei from the Asian Federation leaned forward in his seat. "Dr. Harrison, in your professional opinion, is humanity capable of handling such responsibility? We're talking about forces that drove an entire civilization to abandon physical existence." Harrison paused before answering, knowing that his words could shape the course of human history. 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not. We're barely capable of managing our own planet's environmental systems, let alone cosmic dimensional forces. But the data from Velthara Prime suggests something remarkable. The mere act of accepting this responsibility might accelerate our own evolution. The African Union's spokesperson, Dr. Amara Akafer, stood to address the chamber. "Evolution is a dangerous word to throw around, Dr. Harrison. What guarantee do we have that this evolution would be beneficial? For all we know, we could be walking into the same trap that consumed the Veltharians." "With respect, Dr. Akafer," Harrison replied, "the Veltharians weren't consumed by anything. According to their own records, they chose transcendence. They evolved beyond the need for physical form because they had grown beyond the limitations of normal matter and energy. The question isn't whether this path is dangerous. Everything worth doing involves risk. The question is whether we're brave enough to take the next step in human development." President Sarah Volkov of the European Federation had been silent throughout most of the debate, but now she stood with the authority of someone who had led humanity through its first contact with alien civilizations. Dr. Harrison, what happens if we say no? What are the consequences of refusing this? Inheritance. The physicist's face grew grim. According to the Veltharian data, the dimensional energies have been building for decades. They're looking for a way to stabilize themselves through conscious guidance. If we don't provide that guidance, the energies will eventually find their own release. The models suggest this could create instabilities that spread throughout local space, potentially affecting dozens of star systems. A chill settled over the chamber as the implications became clear. Humanity wasn't just being offered an opportunity, they were being asked to prevent a cosmic disaster. Meanwhile, back on Velthara Prime, Captain Chen's team had been working around the clock to understand the technology they had inherited. The memory stones scattered throughout the city contained not just historical records, but active learning systems that adapted their lessons to the cognitive patterns of whoever accessed them. Dr. Vasquez had made the most dramatic progress. After spending 2 days in deep communion with a cluster of memory stones in what appeared to be the city's main library, she had emerged with knowledge that transformed her understanding of reality itself. "It's not technology in any sense we understand," she explained to her colleagues as they gathered in what had once been a Veltharian research facility. The building seemed to reshape itself around them, organic walls flowing to create perfect acoustics and lighting. "It's more like conscious collaboration with the fundamental forces of existence." She gestured to a complex pattern of light that hung in the air before them, responding to her thoughts and emotions. The Veltharians didn't build machines to manipulate dimensional energy. They learned to ask reality to reshape itself, and reality responded because they had achieved harmony with its underlying patterns. Dr. Webb looked up from his studies of Veltharian biological data. Their physiology was specifically adapted for this kind of interaction. Their crystalline skin wasn't just decorative. It was a sensory organ that could perceive dimensional fluctuations. Their nervous systems were organic quantum computers capable of processing information across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. "Which brings us to the big question," said Sarah, examining the readings her scanner was picking up from her own body. "Can humans develop similar capabilities?" The answer came from an unexpected source. As she spoke, the patterns of light that Dr. Vasquez had been manipulating suddenly shifted, flowing towards Sarah and beginning to orbit around her like luminous pets. She could feel them responding to her emotions, growing brighter when she felt curious and dimming when fear crept into her thoughts. "Remarkable," Dr. Vasquez whispered. "The dimensional energies are already beginning to attune themselves to human consciousness. It's as if they've been waiting for us specifically." Over the following days, all 4 team members began to experience subtle changes. Their perception of the city around them grew more acute. They could sense the flow of energy through the organic structures, feel the gentle pulse of the dimensional forces that permeated everything on Velthara Prime. Most significantly, they began to understand the Veltharian language not through translation, but through direct comprehension. The memory stones were teaching them to think in patterns that transcended mere words, communicating concepts that human language had no terms for. It was during one of these deep learning sessions that they encountered their first major discovery. Hidden in the deepest levels of the city's memory core was a message specifically intended for humanity. The message came in the form of a keeper, but this one was different from the entity they had met in the plaza. This being appeared more solid, more present, as if it existed partially in normal space. "Greetings, inheritors of our legacy," the keeper said, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the human's bones. "I am the final keeper, the last of our number to maintain physical form. I have waited in stasis for 3 decades for the arrival of those who would take up our burden." Sarah stepped forward, feeling the weight of her role as humanity's representative. "Final keeper, we're honored by your people's trust in us, but we need to understand more about what we're being asked to do. The responsibility you're offering could affect not just our species, but the stability of local space itself." The keeper's crystalline features shifted in what might have been approval. "Your caution is wise, Captain Chen. The path we offer is not one to be taken lightly. But understand this. The choice is not between safety and danger. It is between growth and stagnation, between embracing your species' potential and limiting yourselves to what you have already achieved. The chamber around them began to shift and flow, walls becoming transparent to reveal the vast machinery that lay beneath the city. It wasn't mechanical in any conventional sense. Instead, it resembled a vast neural network made of living crystal and flowing energy. "This is the heart of Velthara Prime," the keeper explained. "It is both the source and the focus of the dimensional energies that flow through this world. For millions of years, our people served as its conscious partners, helping to channel and direct forces that connect this reality to countless others." The humans watched in awe as streams of energy flowed through the crystalline network, each pulse carrying information and power between dimensional layers. It was like watching the thoughts of a cosmic mind made visible. "The heart is more than just a tool," the keeper continued. "It is a living entity, ancient beyond measure, that has been seeking new partners since our people transcended physical form. It has been testing your species since you arrived, evaluating your potential for growth." Dr. Webb found his voice, testing us how. In response, the keeper gestured, and the humans suddenly became aware of subtle changes in their own bodies. Their nervous systems had been slowly adapting to the dimensional energies around them. Their brains were developing new neural pathways capable of processing information across multiple layers of reality. "The transformation has already begun," the keeper said. "The heart has found your species compatible, but compatibility alone is not enough. You must make a conscious choice to accept the partnership it offers." Sarah felt a chill of both fear and excitement. What does that partnership involve? The chamber around them exploded into light and sensation as the keeper showed them visions of what humanity could become. They saw human beings working alongside dimensional forces to heal damaged realities, to strengthen the barriers between stable and chaotic regions of space. They witnessed human consciousness expanded to encompass multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, becoming active participants in the maintenance of cosmic order. But they also saw the price of such evolution. Humans who accepted the partnership would be changed in fundamental ways. They would gain abilities that transcended normal physical limitations, but they would also take on responsibilities that would require them to sometimes put cosmic stability ahead of purely human concerns. "This is why the other species of the galaxy rejected us," the keeper said as the visions faded. "They could see only the power we offered, not the wisdom required to use it properly. They feared that accepting our legacy would change them in ways they couldn't control." Dr. Vasquez spoke up, her voice filled with wonder. "But change isn't always something to be feared. Evolution is how species survive and grow." The keeper's form seemed to solidify slightly, as if her words had strengthened its connection to physical reality. "Exactly. Your species has shown a unique capacity for adaptation throughout its history. You have faced extinction-level challenges before and emerged stronger. This is simply the next test in that ongoing process." The transmission link to Earth crackled to life, interrupting their conversation with the keeper. Director Martinez's voice came through clearly, though strained with exhaustion. "Captain Chen, the Council has reached a decision. By a narrow margin, they voted to authorize the establishment of a permanent research colony on Velthara Prime. However, they're insisting on a gradual approach. No more than 50 volunteers initially, and no commitment to the full partnership the Veltharians are offering until we understand the implications better." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and concern. A gradual approach made sense from a human perspective, but the dimensional energies building up around them didn't seem inclined to wait for humanity to make up its mind. The keeper had apparently heard the transmission, because its form began to shimmer with what looked like distress. "I fear your leaders do not understand the urgency of the situation. The dimensional barriers are weakening daily. Soon, the choice will be made for you by forces beyond any of our control." As if to emphasize the point, a tremor ran through the chamber, and several of the crystalline formations cracked. Energy began to leak through the fissures, creating sparks of light that hung in the air like trapped stars. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked. "Perhaps 2 of your months," the keeper replied. "After that, the accumulated energies will breach the containment systems our people built. When that happens, the resulting dimensional storm could destabilize space throughout this entire stellar region." Dr. Webb was studying his scanner readings with growing alarm. The energy levels are already approaching critical thresholds. Captain, we need to get this information back to Earth immediately. But as they prepared to return to their shuttle, the Keeper called out to them one final time. There is another option, one that your leaders may find more palatable. The partnership does not require your entire species to be transformed simultaneously. If even a small number of humans were willing to serve as dimensional guardians, it might be enough to stabilize the situation while the rest of your people decide what path they wish to take. Sarah paused at the chamber's entrance. Are you saying that a few dozen people could handle responsibilities meant for an entire civilization? Not handle, no, but they could serve as bridge builders, helping to establish a stable connection between human consciousness and dimensional forces. Think of them as ambassadors to reality itself. The concept was both terrifying and exhilarating. A small group of humans, voluntarily transformed into something beyond normal human limitations, serving as guardians of cosmic stability while their species decided whether to follow their example. As they made their way back through the city, Sarah found herself studying her teammates with new eyes. All of them had been changed by their exposure to Veltheran technology. All of them were already becoming something more than what they had been when they first arrived. The question was whether they were brave enough to take the final step, and whether humanity as a whole could be convinced that such evolution was not just possible, but necessary. Back on Earth, the debate continued to rage. Religious leaders argued that humanity had no right to play with forces beyond their understanding. Scientists pushed for careful study and gradual implementation. Military leaders worried about the security implications of transforming human beings into entities with cosmic-level powers. But in the overcrowded cities and struggling colonies of human space, a different conversation was taking place. Stories of Velthara Prime and its impossible beauty were spreading through the networks. People who had spent their lives dreaming of something greater than the mundane struggles of survival were beginning to see a possibility for genuine transcendence. Dr. Chen Wei's daughter, a brilliant xenobiology student named Li, had been following the reports from Velthara Prime with fascination. When her father called her from the council chambers, she had a simple question for him. Dad, when in human history have we ever grown by playing it safe? The question echoed through the council chambers, spoken by a young woman who represented the next generation of humanity. A generation that had grown up knowing that aliens existed, that faster-than-light travel was possible, that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than their ancestors had ever imagined. Director Martinez looked around the chamber at the faces of the representatives, seeing her own doubts and fears reflected in their expressions. Then she thought of the young people like Li Chen, who were ready to embrace challenges that their elders could barely comprehend. Perhaps, she said slowly, it's time to ask for volunteers. The response to Director Martinez's call for volunteers exceeded every expectation. Within hours of the announcement, applications began flooding in from across human space. Scientists, artists, philosophers, engineers, and ordinary citizens who simply felt called to something greater than themselves, all requesting the chance to be part of humanity's greatest adventure. Dr. Li Chen was among the first to volunteer. Despite her father's concerns, she had already begun studying the preliminary data from Velthara Prime, teaching herself the basics of dimensional physics and Veltharian cultural patterns. When she stepped off the transport ship 6 weeks later, she was ready to dedicate her life to understanding the legacy humanity had inherited. Captain Sarah Chen watched the new arrivals with mixed emotions. The 50 volunteers represented some of humanity's brightest minds and most adventurous spirits. Among them were Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a quantum physicist who had spent years developing theories that paralleled Veltharian science; Dr. Quema Sant, a philosopher specializing in consciousness studies; Maria Santos, an artist whose work with light and energy had caught the attention of the selection committee; and Thomas Anderson, a former Marine whose experience with hostile environments made him invaluable for exploring the more dangerous aspects of Veltheran technology. But they also represented 50 human beings who would be forever changed by what they were about to experience. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility for each of their lives. The colony had grown significantly in the weeks since first contact with the final keeper. Human prefabricated structures now stood alongside the flowing Veltharan architecture, creating a unique fusion of organic and geometric forms. More importantly, the colonists had begun to establish a working relationship with the city's living systems. Dr. Vasquez had made the most dramatic progress in understanding Veltheran biotechnology. Working with memory stones scattered throughout the city, she had learned to communicate directly with the organic systems that maintain the urban environment. Gardens now bloomed with hybrid plants that combined Earth and Veltheran genetics. Buildings responded to human needs, adjusting temperature and lighting automatically. But the most significant development was happening at a deeper level. The 50 volunteers were being slowly integrated into what the final keeper called the recognition protocol, a process by which the dimensional energies that permeated Velthara Prime would learn to work with human consciousness. Li Chen felt the change beginning on her third day on the planet. She was studying memory stones in the central library when suddenly the patterns of light they projected became directly comprehensible. She wasn't reading Veltheran symbols anymore. She was understanding the concepts they represented at a fundamental level. "It's like learning to see in a new spectrum," she explained to her father during their weekly communication session. "The information isn't being translated into human terms. My brain is developing new ways of processing reality itself." Dr. Chen Wei listened to his daughter's words with a mixture of pride and terror. The young woman on the screen looked like Li, but there were subtle differences. Her eyes seemed to hold depths that hadn't been there before, and when she gestured, faint patterns of light sometimes followed her movements. "Are you still human, Li?" he asked quietly. She considered the question seriously before answering. "I'm becoming more human than I ever was before, Dad. I'm learning to use capabilities that were always part of our species' potential, but that we never knew how to access. The Veltharians didn't change what we are, they taught us what we could become." Similar transformations were occurring throughout the volunteer group. Dr. Tanaka found that her understanding of quantum mechanics had evolved to encompass relationships between particles that existed across multiple dimensional layers. Maria Santos discovered that she could manipulate light itself, creating sculptures that existed partially outside normal space. Thomas Anderson's military training adapted to allow him to perceive and navigate dimensional hazards that would be invisible to normal human senses. But the most significant transformation was happening to Dr. Asant. His studies of consciousness had prepared him for the possibility that awareness itself might be more fundamental than physical reality. Working closely with the final keeper, he was learning to extend his consciousness across dimensional boundaries, becoming humanity's first true ambassador to the cosmic forces that governed reality. It was during one of these deep communion sessions that disaster struck. The dimensional barriers that had been weakening for months finally reached a critical threshold. Without warning, a massive energy surge ripped through the heart of Velthara Prime, sending shockwaves throughout the city and beyond. The human colonists felt it as a physical blow that knocked most of them to the ground. Buildings shook as dimensional forces raged through the city's organic systems. In orbit, the monitoring stations detected energy readings that exceeded anything in their databases. But for the 50 volunteers who had been undergoing the recognition protocol, the experience was entirely different. Instead of being overwhelmed by the surge, they found themselves able to perceive and interact with the chaotic energies. Their transformed consciousness allowed them to serve as conduits, helping to channel the overwhelming forces into more stable patterns. Li Chen found herself standing in the central plaza, her hands raised toward the great tree-like structure that housed the heart. Energy flowed through her like a river of liquid starlight, and she could feel the dimensional boundaries stabilizing in response to her presence. Around the plaza, her fellow volunteers stood in similar positions, each serving as an anchor point for forces that could reshape reality itself. The final keeper materialized beside them, its form more solid than ever before. "The cascade has begun," it said, its voice carrying harmonics of both joy and sorrow. "The energies can no longer be contained by artificial barriers. From this point forward, they must be guided by conscious will." Dr. Asant, still deep in communion with cosmic forces, spoke without opening his eyes. "We can do this. The protocol worked. We're stable enough to serve as permanent anchors." But even as he spoke, alarms began sounding from the monitoring stations. The dimensional disturbance was spreading beyond Velthara Prime, creating instabilities in nearby star systems. On Earth, Astronomers detected anomalous readings from radio telescopes as space itself rippled with unleashed energies. The Galactic Council, which had remained silent throughout humanity's exploration of Velthara Prime, suddenly found its communication networks flooded with distress signals. The dimensional cascade was affecting trade routes throughout the local stellar region. Ships attempting faster-than-light travel were being thrown off course by the chaotic energy patterns. Within hours, a massive council fleet was en route to Velthara Prime, led by the dreadnought Absolute Authority under the command of Supreme Admiral Zorix of the Kethter hegemony. The Kethter were one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations, and they had no patience for what they saw as human recklessness endangering galactic stability. "By the time we arrive," Admiral Zorix announced over emergency communication channels, "I expect the human presence on Velthara Prime to be completely withdrawn. If necessary, we will sterilize the planet to prevent further contamination." The threat sent shockwaves through human space. Earth's defensive fleets began mobilizing, but everyone knew they were no match for a full Council armada. Humanity had managed to earn membership in galactic civilization through trade and diplomacy, not military might. On Velthara Prime, the volunteers continued their work of stabilizing the dimensional cascade, but they could feel the approaching fleet like a storm on the horizon. The cosmic forces they were channeling carried information across vast distances, and they sensed the hostile intentions of the approaching ships. Captain Chen faced the most difficult decision of her career. She could order an evacuation, abandoning Velthara Prime and the cosmic responsibilities humanity had inherited. Or she could trust that her transformed volunteers could find a way to prove to the galaxy that humans deserved the legacy they had been given. The final keeper provided the answer. "There is a way," it said as the volunteers gathered in the central plaza. "The dimensional energies are no longer confined to this world. They flow throughout local space, creating connections between all inhabited systems in this stellar region. If your people could demonstrate mastery of these forces, could show the galaxy that humanity is capable of enhancing rather than endangering cosmic stability, even the Council would have to acknowledge your right to inherit our legacy." Li Chen looked up at the approaching fleet, her enhanced senses allowing her to perceive the ships despite their vast distance. "What kind of demonstration?" The keeper gestured toward the energy patterns flowing around them. "The Council fleet will emerge from hyperspace in 3 days. When they do, they will expect to find chaos and destruction. Instead, you could show them a stabilized system where dimensional forces enhance rather than threaten normal space." Dr. Asant opened his eyes, and they now glowed with the same inner light that characterized Veltheran consciousness. "You're talking about expanding our influence beyond this planet, turning the entire stellar region into a stable dimensional nexus." "Exactly. But such a feat would require perfect coordination among all 50 volunteers and absolute trust in abilities you have only begun to develop. The slightest mistake could turn the entire region into a dimensional storm that would require millennia to stabilize." The weight of the moment settled on the volunteers like a physical presence. They were being asked to stake not just their own lives, but the stability of dozens of star systems, on their ability to master forces that had driven the Veltharians themselves to transcend physical existence. Thomas Anderson, his military training asserting itself, was the first to voice the obvious concern. "What if we fail? What if we make things worse instead of better?" The final keeper's response was simple and devastating. "Then the Council will do what they came to do, and Velthara Prime will be sterilized. But more importantly, humanity will have proven that it lacks the wisdom necessary for cosmic responsibility. Your species will be confined to normal space, forbidden from accessing the dimensional sciences that could transform your civilization." Sarah Chen felt the weight of her role as humanity's representative on this distant world. The decision they made here would determine not just the fate of the volunteers, but the future evolution of their entire species. "How do we know we're ready?" she asked. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her form now partially translucent as she had learned to exist simultaneously across multiple dimensional layers. "Captain, we've already changed more than we ever thought possible. We're not the same humans who arrived here months ago. We've become something new, something that might be capable of shouldering cosmic responsibility." Maria Santos added her voice, patterns of light dancing around her as she spoke. The energies aren't fighting us anymore, they're working with us. It's like the universe itself wants us to succeed. Li Chen looked around at her fellow volunteers, seeing not just human beings, but pioneers of a new form of existence. We came here to establish a colony. Instead, we discovered that we could become guardians of reality itself. Maybe it's time to find out what humanity is truly capable of. The vote was unanimous. Over the next 3 days, the 50 volunteers worked with an intensity that bordered on desperation. Using techniques learned from the memory stones and guided by the final keeper, they began to extend their influence beyond Velthara Prime itself. Working in perfect synchronization, they reached out with their enhanced consciousness to touch the dimensional forces that flowed throughout local space. Star by star, system by system, they began to weave a network of stability that turned chaotic energies into harmonious patterns. The effect was immediately visible to anyone with the proper instruments. Trade routes that had been disrupted by dimensional instabilities suddenly became smoother than ever before. Ships found that their faster-than-light drives operated with unprecedented efficiency. Even communication across interstellar distances became clearer and more reliable. By the time the Council fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Velthara system, they found something they had never expected to encounter. Instead of the chaotic dimensional storm they had come to contain, they discovered a region of space that was more stable and harmonious than anything in their records. Admiral Zorix stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at sensor readings that defied explanation. "These readings can't be correct," he said to his science officer. "According to our instruments, local space has been transformed into a dimensional nexus of unprecedented stability." "The readings are accurate, Admiral," the science officer replied, her voice filled with wonder. "Somehow, the humans have not only contained the cascade, they've turned it into an enhancement to local spacetime structure." On the surface of Velthara Prime, the volunteers maintained their vigil. They could feel the massive Council fleet studying them, could sense the confusion and growing respect of the alien commanders as they realized what humanity had accomplished. The final keeper had grown increasingly solid over the past days, as if the successful stabilization was allowing it to maintain a stronger connection to physical reality. Now it stood among the volunteers like a living bridge between what the Veltharians had been and what humanity was becoming. "They are beginning to understand," it said, its voice carrying harmonics of satisfaction. "For the first time in 30 years, the galaxy's established civilizations are seeing evidence that a young species might possess wisdom they themselves lack." The communication request came directly from Admiral Zorix himself. When the channel opened, the proud Kethter commander found himself looking at beings who were recognizably human, but who had clearly transcended normal human limitations. "I am Supreme Admiral Zorix of the Kethter hegemony," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to absolute obedience. "By order of the Galactic Council, you will explain how you have achieved the impossible." Captain Chen, her form now shimmering with patterns of light that spoke of her connection to cosmic forces, smiled at the alien commander. "Admiral, we'd be happy to share our knowledge, but first we have a proposal for the Council." The audacity of a human making proposals to the Galactic Council would normally have been met with scorn, but the evidence of what humanity had accomplished was undeniable. Zorix found himself listening with growing interest as Chen outlined humanity's vision for the future. "The Veltharians left us more than just technology," she explained. "They left us a responsibility to help maintain cosmic stability. We propose establishing a new kind of civilization, one dedicated not to conquest or exploitation, but to serving as guardians of dimensional harmony." Li Chen stepped forward, her enhanced senses allowing her to perceive the alien commander's emotional state across the vast distance between ship and planet. "Admiral, your people have achieved mastery over matter and energy, but you've never learned to work with the fundamental forces that connect all realities. We could teach you." The offer hung in space between them like a bridge across an infinite gulf. For 30 years, the galaxy's civilizations had turned their backs on the Veltharians and their incomprehensible evolution. Now humanity was offering them a second chance to understand what they had rejected. Dr. Asant, his consciousness now capable of spanning multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, spoke with the authority of one who had touched the cosmic forces themselves. The choice is the same one that faced every species when they first encountered Veltharan science. You can reject what you don't understand, or you can grow into something greater than what you were before. Admiral Zorix found himself facing a decision that would echo through galactic history. The humans had proven themselves capable of shouldering responsibilities that his own ancient civilization had deemed impossible. They offered knowledge that could transform every species in known space. But acceptance would mean acknowledging that a young, aggressive species had achieved something that the galaxy's established powers could not. The silence stretched for long minutes as the Admiral weighed options that could reshape the balance of galactic civilization. Finally, he spoke. The Council will need to convene to consider your proposal, but I will carry a message to them on your behalf. You have earned the right to be heard. As the Council fleet withdrew to deliberate, the volunteers on Velthara Prime continued their work. They had proven that humanity could evolve beyond its limitations when faced with cosmic responsibility. They had shown that courage and wisdom could triumph over fear and prejudice. But most importantly, they had kept alive the legacy of the Veltharians, a legacy of growth, transcendence, and service to something greater than oneself. The final keeper watched the departing fleet with satisfaction. Our people chose well when they decided to trust your species, it said. You have shown the galaxy that evolution is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. Li Chen looked up at the stars that no longer seemed distant and alien, but were now part of a vast network of consciousness and energy that she and her fellow volunteers helped maintain. This is just the beginning, isn't it? The keeper's crystalline features shifted in what was unmistakably a smile. Indeed, you have taken the first step toward becoming a truly cosmic civilization. The journey ahead will transform not just humanity, but every species willing to grow alongside you. As the twin suns of Velthara Prime set behind the flowing spires of the city, the 50 volunteers stood together in the central plaza, guardians of forces that connected all realities. They had come to this world as explorers and colonists. They were becoming something far greater, shepherds of the cosmic order itself. Humanity had answered the call that every other species had rejected. In doing so, they had not only inherited the Veltharian legacy, but had proven themselves worthy of writing the next chapter in the cosmic story of growth, wisdom, and transcendence. The stars themselves seemed to pulse with approval as the volunteers settled in for another night of maintaining the dimensional harmony that now blessed their corner of the galaxy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities for growth. But tonight, for the first time in 30 years, the gentle, crystalline beings who had transcended physical existence could rest, knowing that their legacy lived on in hands capable of carrying it forward into an infinite future of possibility.